After nearly 20 debates, a couple of sex scandals, and more than half of the candidates dropping out, tomorrow is the primary election in Florida. And on the sidelines of Mitt versus Newt boxing match over morals, money, and conservative values, well, there's another battle. Those who are concerned about Ron Paul. You may be wondering why, given that he hasn't yet won a primary and is polling in a distant fourth place in Florida. Well, Ron Paul's supporters are not only loyal, many of them are in a target demographic group. They're young. Take a look at some of these numbers out of New Hampshire. When you look at voters between 19 and 29 years old, Ron Paul in New Hampshire got nearly half the vote, 46%. Apparently, the situation was similar in Iowa. Ron Paul got 48% of the young vote there. This is just one of many factors involved in this pot of ingredients we call the fight to become the GOP nominee. So I want to talk about what we can call the Ron Paul effect with Julie Borowski, a Ron Paul supporter. Julie, let's talk about these numbers of the young vote, first of all. Ron Paul is the oldest candidate here. Why is it that his message resonates with so many young people?
Yeah, it is kind of strange to see a 76-year-old man, very conservative, very religious, get so much support from young people. And I think one of the reasons is because Ron Paul tells it like it is. He doesn't sugarcoat things. He has a consistent record. He is going to do what he says. In his plan to restore America, he wants to cut $1 trillion in the first year alone. He's talking about big ideas, and the other candidates are not.
So you think that's something that resonates with young people. It's interesting because there seems to be a feeling of being threatened by Ron Paul and some of the supporters also. So this is what happens in presidential primaries. You know, votes for one candidate means that those votes don't go to other candidates. But some conservatives say they've had enough. And I don't know if you've seen this, Julie, but these conservatives have launched a petition to try to steer support away from Ron Paul. I want to put it up on the screen. Included in this petition, quote, "The time has come for true conservatives to rise up and take a stand." They also call those who support Ron Paul, quote, "radical leftists." And it says the real conservatives of the Republican Party hereby demand that Ron Paul end his presidential campaign at once and exit the GOP along with his radical cult followers and supporters. Now, I don't know about you, Julie, but a lot of the Ron Paul supporters that I've come into contact with, this sort of like threatening language. They've also threatened to get in the way of Ron Paul's son, Senator Rand Paul, next time he's campaigning, if he doesn't get out and if he launches, a third-party campaign. You and your friends that support Ron Paul, I mean, does this kind of threatening language work?
No, what's going on right now is there's an ugly fight between establishment Republicans and true conservatives. Ron Paul is a threat to the establishment. He's dangerous to the status quo. And they don't want to have a debate on foreign policy. So what they're doing is they're trying to marginalize Ron Paul and his supporters, calling us racist, anti-Semitic, calling us leftists, basically name-calling with no facts to back it up.
Yeah, there's a lot of name-calling and finger-pointing and, sort of warnings that if you vote for Ron Paul, you're taking away votes from other people. There is another side of this. There is another side of those who, wouldn't be sad to see Ron Paul go, but they don't want to offend people like yourself and other Ron Paul supporters. I want to play a little bit about what the former CEO of GE, Jack Welch, said about Ron Paul supporters.
Ron Paul is going to exit left on this stage sometime down the road before August or in August, and the GOP doesn't want to lose those wonderful voters that he's brought on board. So how well they treat Ron Paul going forward is a very big deal.
All right, so here you have this approach. Be nice to the supporters. Treat them well. He goes on to say, it should be in the same way that you treat somebody that you're firing. Make sure they leave with dignity. What do you think about that approach?
Well, I'm a little more optimistic about Ron Paul's chances, but I know a lot of people who say if the GOP doesn't nominate Ron Paul, don't count on our votes. We might even go third party. And the GOP for years has been trying to get the youth vote. How can we get the young people? How come the Democrats get the young people? Finally, young people are flocking to the Republican Party and we're being marginalized. We're being called a bunch of names. And that strategy is probably the dumbest thing I can think of.
Especially since certainly President Obama in 2008 got a lot of the young vote. A lot of people came out in support for him. And I know that's something that Ron Paul has said in the past, I'm the only candidate that's actually going to bring the young people out to vote. But what about this notion, Julie, that young people don't often show up. I mean, will this be the case if Ron Paul doesn't make it much further? Will they just not show up?
I think if Ron Paul is still in there, they will show up. The thing about Ron Paul supporters is they're the most passionate. No matter what, rain, storm, snow, blizzard, we're going to show up at the polls.
How do you know that? I mean, it's very, optimistic to say that, but what have you experienced in your time that really has shown you that Ron Paul supporters are here to stay?
Because if you look at New Hampshire and Iowa, 50% of young people almost showed up for Ron Paul. And I know so many Ron Paul supporters who are going to the polls, and they never voted before, and they're voting for Ron Paul this time.
What happens after Florida? Nobody really expects Ron Paul to do very well in Florida. Have you heard anything in terms of what's next?
Well, I don't think the Ron Paul campaign is focusing that much on Florida because it's the winner takes all delegates. But I know he has a good chance in other states such as Nevada, which is very libertarian leaning.
All right. Julie Borowski, a Ron Paul supporter. Thanks so much for coming in today and sharing your views.